Many years ago, on an old dusty road, there was a little boy, holding nothing but a torn notebook and a big dream shining in his eyes. He wasn't born into a rich family. He didn't have famous friends or expensive clothes. He had just one thing, a small, stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, he could change the world. People laughed at him. They said, "What can someone like you really do?" But he didn't stop. Year after year, through failures, loneliness, and storms, he kept walking toward a future no one else could see. He didn't become a hero overnight. He wasn't given any special power. He simply refused to give up, even when the whole world told him to. And today, his story is not just about him anymore. It's about how one dream, even from the smallest soul, can light up the lives of millions. So, without waiting any longer, let's step into the journey of a boy who became the last dreamer. Let the story begin. Nobody believed in Aiden Gray, not his teachers, not the kids in his neighborhood, not even the dusty old town that had swallowed so many dreams before him. They said dreams were for people born under luckier stars, for people with rich fathers, with polished smiles, with golden tickets tucked into their back pockets. Aiden had none of those things. All he had was a crumpled notebook full of sketches, wild ideas, and a heart that refused to surrender. He grew up in a town where factories closed before kids learned to spell, where hope was a rumor, where every adult walked with their heads down, shoulders heavy with invisible burdens. But Aiden looked up. He saw stars where others saw empty skies. He saw blueprints where others saw broken walls. At 16, he built his first invention, a handmade solar panel using scrap metal, broken glass, and old batteries. It barely powered a light bulb, but for Aiden, it was a miracle. He showed it to his science teacher, a tired man who barely glanced at it before muttering, "Waste of time, Gray. Get a real job." So Aiden worked real jobs, loading trucks, cleaning gutters, flipping burgers, by day, and by night, he built dreams. At 19, he packed everything he owned, 2 shirts, a worn-out laptop, and the battered notebook, into a duffel bag and boarded a bus to the city. The city was a monster, towering. Skyscrapers, endless traffic, faces that blurred into a river of indifference. Aiden found a roach-infested room above a noisy bar and lived on instant noodles and secondhand dreams. Every rejection letter hit like a hammer to the heart. Underqualified. No experience. Position filled. But he kept designing. New energy systems, affordable housing models, portable medical devices for remote villages. Ideas poured out of him faster than he could find paper to catch them. One rainy night broke and exhausted, Aiden sat on the floor of his tiny room, staring at his laptop screen glowing with the last spark of battery. An open application blinked at him. Innovators Without Borders. Submit your ideas to change the world. He had nothing to lose. With shaking fingers, he uploaded his designs, clicked submit, and whispered into the silence, "Please." Then he fell asleep, the rain tapping against the cracked window like a lullaby. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Aiden ran out of money. He started sleeping in shelters, washing dishes for coins. He wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had been right. All along. Maybe some dreams were meant to die. And then one morning his phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. "Congratulations, Aiden Gray. You have been selected as a finalist." The competition was brutal. Geniuses from around the world, Ivy League prodigies, tech billionaires' sons and daughters. And Aiden, the kid with the duct-taped laptop and second-hand sneakers. They laughed at him behind polished smiles. They dismissed his accent, his worn-out clothes, his wild, unpolished passion. But when Aiden stood up to present his project, a modular energy unit that could bring power to the most forgotten corners of the world, something in the room shifted. The judges stopped scrolling on their phones. The audience leaned forward. Because Aiden didn't just talk about technology. He talked about hope, about little kids studying by candlelight, about old women dying in darkness because there was no electricity, about building a world where no one was invisible. He didn't win first place. The award went to a polished team from a fancy university, But when the ceremony ended, a woman in a simple blue dress approached him. She was the head of a major humanitarian foundation, and she didn't care about degrees or pedigrees. She cared about heart. "You," she said, offering her hand, "are exactly what this world needs." That night, Aiden stood on the rooftop of his shelter, staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a nobody. He felt like a spark, and sparks, he knew, could start wildfires. The next 2 years moved like a whirlwind. Aiden. Gray, once a boy who slept in bus stations, now traveled to countries most people only saw in travel magazines. His modular energy units, cheap, portable, and durable, transformed entire villages. Kids who had never seen electric lights before now read books deep into the night. Hospitals that once turned patients away because of power cuts now saved lives around the clock. Newspapers began calling him the last dreamer, a nod to the fact that, unlike others chasing fortune, Aiden still chased something purer, a better world. But success, Aiden learned, came with a price. He became a symbol. A story everyone wanted to control. Billion-dollar corporations offered him blank checks to sell his technology, to make it exclusive, to put it behind walls of privilege. "Think about what you could do with all that money," they whispered. "You could live in a penthouse, drive supercars, never have to struggle again." For a boy who had once counted coins for bus fare, the temptation was suffocating. He sat awake at night, staring at the contracts. The numbers danced before his tired eyes, enough zeros to erase all his scars, to buy all the comfort he had ever dreamed of. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he remembered the faces. The little girl in Tanzania who cried when she turned on a light bulb for the first time. The old man in a flooded village who blessed him with trembling hands. The boy with torn shoes who said, "Because of you, I want to be an engineer." How do you put a price on a soul? Aiden said no. He refused every offer that demanded exclusivity. He refused every partnership that put profit before people. The media turned against him. Naive. Foolish. A martyr complex. Big companies ran smear campaigns, calling him unreliable, unstable. He lost donors. He lost friends. At one point, he nearly lost everything. One rainy afternoon, the kind that reminded him too much of old days, Aiden sat alone in his tiny office. The walls were peeling. The lights flickered. He was broke again, worn out again, and for the first time in years, doubt crept in like a cold, damp fog. "Maybe they're right," he whispered to the empty room. "Maybe dreams don't feed the hungry. Maybe I was a fool after all." He buried his face in his hands, and that's when she walked in, Sophia Reyes. She wasn't a billionaire. She wasn't a politician. She was a teacher from a forgotten school deep in the mountains. In her arms, she carried a dusty box. Inside were hundreds of letters. Letters from children whose lives had been changed by Aiden's inventions. Drawings. Of lights. Stories of studying late into the night. Poems about hope. Sophia placed the box on his desk without a word. Aiden opened it, letter after letter spilling into his lap like a river of gratitude. He read until his eyes blurred with tears, and when he looked up, Sophia was smiling. "Don't you dare give up," she said. "You're not just building machines, Aiden. You're building tomorrow." That night, Aiden made a vow to himself. He would never sell out. He would never forget where he came from. He would stay a dreamer, till his last breath. And when the world told him he was finished, he would answer the only way he knew how: by dreaming bigger. The years that followed tested him in ways he couldn't have imagined. His equipment was stolen by warlords in unstable regions. Factories building his designs were sabotaged by corrupt competitors. Once, he barely escaped an attack on a village he was helping electrify. But every time he was knocked down, he rose again. Because Aiden Gray had learned the most important truth of all. Dreams don't die unless you let them. And he was not about to let his die. Not now. Not ever. Eventually, the world began to notice again. Not the tabloids, not the billionaires, the people, the villages who named their new schools after him. The mothers who named their sons Aiden. The forgotten ones, who built monuments to a man they had never met, but who had changed their lives forever. Aiden became a legend, but not in the way he had imagined as a boy. Not in glittering cities, but in dirt roads, in candlelit homes, in whispered bedtime stories of a boy who refused to give up. Years passed. The world changed. Solar cities rose from deserts. Artificial intelligence redefined industries. Spacecrafts sailed beyond the moon. And somewhere in the noise and glitter of this brave new world, Aiden Gray kept working. Quietly, stubbornly, in the corners that the headlines forgot. He wasn't young anymore. His hair had grayed around the temples. The lines around his eyes had deepened, the kind you earn only through years of fighting battles nobody else sees. But his heart was still 19, still full of the stubborn, blazing hope that had carried him this far. One crisp, winter morning, Aiden woke up in a hospital bed. He barely remembered collapsing. He barely remembered the concerned faces, the rushed ambulance, the sterile beeping of machines. The doctor sat by his side, speaking gently. "Your heart is weak, Mr. Gray. You've pushed yourself too hard for too long. You need to rest now." Rest? Aiden almost laughed. Rest was a word for people who had finished their race. And he had one last dream left to build. He discharged himself against doctors' orders. He returned to his small, cluttered workshop, filled with blueprints, old tools, faded photographs, and he started sketching. This time, not a machine, not a device, not even a solution. This time, he designed an idea. He called it the Tomorrow Project, a global network of dreamers, engineers, doctors, teachers, builders, united not by profit, but by purpose. An open-source platform where anyone, anywhere, could access free technology, free education, free hope, no gates, no walls, no exclusions. It would be his final gift to the world, and this time he knew he wouldn't live to see it fully bloom. But that didn't matter. Dreams, he had learned, were like seeds. You planted them not for yourself, but for a world you might never see. He worked through the days and nights, weak, coughing, often collapsing at his desk, but refusing to stop. Word spread like wildfire among the communities he had touched over the years. Volunteers poured in. Old students, inspired teachers, young engineers who had once read by the light of his inventions. Together, they built the Tomorrow Project. One line of code at a time. One village at a time. One soul at a time. On the last night of his life, Aiden sat outside his workshop. The stars overhead burned bright and cold. He wrapped an old scarf around his thin shoulders and smiled at the sky. Little boy, maybe 5 or 6, ran up to him. The boy's name was Mateo, a child from a nearby shelter electrified by one of Aiden's earliest units. Mateo clutched a small hand-drawn card. He handed it shyly to Aiden. It showed a picture. A big, smiling sun. A stick figure with messy hair, clearly meant to be Aiden, holding a light bulb. And 3 simple words scrawled in crayon. "Thank you, dreamer." Aiden laughed, a soft, broken sound, and pulled the boy into a hug. No awards, no riches, just this, just this. Later that night, under the blanket of a billion stars, Aiden Gray closed his eyes for the final time. He was not alone. He was carried, away by the dreams he had refused to abandon. And somewhere, in 1,000 towns and cities, lights burned brightly, stubborn, beautiful, unquenchable. Epilogue. Years after his passing, statues were built in his memory. Not in marble halls, but in schoolyards, in crowded hospitals, in refugee camps. Wherever hope had found a foothold, a small plaque bore his name, Aiden Gray, the last dreamer. He believed in us before we believed in ourselves, and under that, carved into stone, a quote he once scribbled in the margins of an old notebook. Dreams are not meant to be caged by fear. They are meant to be set free, even if it costs everything. And so they were, and so they are, and so they will be, for as long as even one soul dares to dream. After Aiden Gray took his last breath under the silent stars, the world moved on. But something had changed forever. It started small. A single classroom in a forgotten village now had access to computers, powered by the modular energy units he designed. Children, who once memorized lessons by candlelight, now explored the entire universe with a few keystrokes. Then it spread. A forgotten village became a connected town. A town became a hub of innovation. A hub became a revolution. The Tomorrow Project, Aiden's final dream, exploded into life. It transcended borders, politics, and prejudices. Refugee camps became self-sufficient micro-cities. Remote islands built sustainable grids using his open-source plans. Young inventors from war-torn countries used his free blueprints to build technologies their governments had refused to provide. Governments noticed. Universities noticed. But most importantly, ordinary people noticed. And they carried Aiden's vision forward. Not for fame, not for fortune, but because they understood he had believed in them first, when no one else had. A new generation rose up, calling themselves the Dreamers. They wore simple badges, a small hand-drawn light bulb, just like the one little Mateo had drawn for Aiden. They held annual Aiden Gray festivals, not fancy ceremonies, but giant gatherings where anyone from any background could share ideas, inventions, and dreams without fear. Children learned to ask, "What problem can I solve?" Today, instead of, "What can I get today?" Dreamers built wells in deserts. Dreamers developed medicines for rare diseases, offering them for free. Dreamers electrified schools hidden deep within jungles. In a decade, the impact was undeniable. Global literacy rates rose. Child mortality dropped. Entire regions once crippled by poverty began to thrive. And when historians traced back the origins of this quiet, unstoppable revolution, they found a name carved into countless hearts and walls: Aiden Gray. In one of the largest Dreamer hubs, a giant monument stood, not of Aiden's face, but of an open notebook, pages fluttering in an eternal breeze. Because that's how Aiden had lived. Always dreaming, always unfinished, always moving forward. Beneath the monument, a simple inscription: "The ones who dream for others leave behind worlds we never imagined." Final scene. An old woman walked her grandson through the monument gardens. He tugged on her hand and asked, "Grandma, why do they call him the last dreamer?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "Because," she said softly, "he dreamed when no one else dared. And because of him, you, me, all of us, we are not the last. We are only the beginning." The little boy grinned. He pulled out a crayon and started sketching in his notebook. Not superheroes, not kings, but new ideas, a new future, a new dream. And somewhere, in the whisper of the winds that rustled the trees, it almost sounded like a voice saying, "Keep dreaming, kid."